Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and this is my Golden Booker Journey wrap-up video. So first I just want to talk to you about one or two things with respect to Hilary Mantel. I saw her speak on that Friday night along with Pat Barker. One of the stories that Hilary Mantel told us, one of the things she related, was how, and I got the impression this was pretty recently, but archaeologists seem to have unearthed the remains of what had been Rafe Sadler's house. And I think it's in East End, London. Now, Rafe Sadler was one of Thomas Cromwell's household. If you read Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies, you'll recognize his name. And anyway, Hilary Mantel was invited out to look at the bricks, to look at the site. And what she noticed, or the detail that she carried away with her, was a paw print from a dog in one of the bricks. And she spoke about how at the time, centuries ago, that these brick makers were probably irritated that there was a paw print from a dog in one of the bricks. But she loved that detail, as a novelist would, because it revealed a kind of warmth, right? It betrayed the family, the camaraderie, the kinship between people, the kinship between humans and animals that had been in that household at that time. It was a kind of detail that made the site come alive, right? As if kind of ghosts were springing up. It was a nice little glimpse into her mind, into the kinds of specifics and minutiae that are important to her, and to how she sees the world and how she imagines the worlds that she creates. Another thing that Hilary Mantel shared with us, a little glimpse into her writing of The Mirror and the Light, which she assured us would be out next year, was how, so in Wolf Hall, as many of you know, oftentimes she refers to Thomas Cromwell as just he. And initially it can be very confusing when reading that book, trying to figure out who the antecedent is for this pronoun. In the second book, she often refers to him as he, Thomas Cromwell. I had always thought that she had made that change from one book to the next as a way of kind of tamping down the ruffled feathers of readers who had been confused. But that's not the case. In the third book, she is frequently referring to him as he, Thomas Lord Cromwell. And what I love about this is that it's just a simple way over the course of 3 books of demonstrating this social ladder that Cromwell is ascending, demonstrating his increasing importance at court, his increasing importance to Henry. And it's brilliant and it's subtle, and I think it's very powerful. And it was the kind of detail that when she told us this, it gave me goosebumps. I wanted to just dive into the novel right now. So I have another year to wait, but I can do that. On Saturday morning, my friend Ben and I met with Jasmine from Jasmine's Reads and her boyfriend Cameron. And we all attended the Howard Jacobson talk together, Why the Novel Matters. It was a little bit alarming because even though it was a free talk and it was about a crisis in the importance of the novel, I would say the auditorium was half full. And so that made us all a little bit sad, but Jacobson was wonderful. He's a rascal. I find him hilarious. I think I'm in the minority as far as that goes. But one of the things that he said that I just really loved, and it's not the first time I've encountered this. He has a column in his book, Whatever It Is, I Don't Like It, that touches on this as well. But he discussed his disdain for the phrase and the thought behind page turners as a phenomenon in reading. He feels like books should antagonize us, that they should discomfort us, that they should expand us, and that in order for them to do that, we have to put them down occasionally. We have to think about what we're reading. We have to grapple with it. We have to wrestle with it. And the only way to do that is to put the book down and kind of take the measure of what it's doing to us, to assess our own investment in it, to assess what we have in the game, essentially. And I thought that was classic Jacobson. He expects a lot of us as readers, and of himself as a reader, as he should. On Saturday afternoon, Ben and I attended a panel discussion on literary adaptation to film, and featured Colin Toybeen and Eleanor Catton, Christopher Hampton, and that was pretty wonderful. Afterward, I bought a copy of The Luminaries and got it signed by Eleanor Catton. And some of you, I think it was Curtis, was wondering what I was talking to her about. And I had told her how far I had traveled, almost 5,000 miles for that weekend. And she was struck by that, and she wanted to know where I was from. And so I told her Wyoming. And she said that she was familiar with Wyoming, and that her and her husband had done some hiking around Jackson Hole. And I told her about how Jackson Hole doesn't really feel like it belongs to Wyoming, and the rest of Wyoming doesn't really feel like it wants Jackson Hole to belong to Wyoming. The most wonderful thing, though, about Eleanor Catton is how when she's talking to you, it's like the rest of the world falls away for her, and you're the only thing that she's interested in that moment. You really feel seen by her, and that feels wonderful, wonderful for a writer to regard his or her readers in that way, because most of them don't, not by any stretch of the imagination. So I had been curious to read The Luminaries before. I'm dying to read The Luminaries now, in large part because of how giving she was with her attention in that 60 seconds I was standing there at the signing table. Then on the morning of the last day, Sunday, Ben and I heard Julian Barnes and Peter Carey speak. Now, some of you know, Peter Carey is my favorite living novelist. And he was asked by someone in the audience about his revision process. And I learned something about his revision process that might actually account for why I love his work as much as I do. So Peter Carey said that of all the books he's ever written, that he has never actually done a complete first draft in the writing of any of them. That he isn't one of those writers who does draft 1, then draft 2, draft 3, draft 4, etc. That he is compelled to revise as he goes. So whether that's paragraph by paragraph or a short chapter by short chapter, he finds it difficult to leave writing behind until he's gotten it really close to where it's going to end up. And in the past, when I have tried my hand at writing fiction, that's how I work as well. And I've had people tell me, no, just get the first draft out. But I can't do it. And I get bogged down after 10 or 12 pages of writing. And the fact that Carey's revision process is similar to that, in that there's a kind of fussiness at work, which results, I think, in a kind of lavish, almost clotted prose style. It makes me wonder if because my brain works that way in writing, it makes me wonder if it recognizes in reading another mind that works that way in writing. I don't know. Who knows? It could be that I'm reading way too much into that, but I feel like maybe I'm not. I feel like maybe I'm onto something. And the last Golden Booker event that I attended was Sunday afternoon, and that was an unmoderated conversation between Michael Ondaatje and Kazuo Ishiguro, who have been friends for a very long time. which I didn't realize. So that was fun to discover. And one of the coolest things that I took away from that conversation was Ondaatje's sharing of his own kind of revision process. Speaking of the act of revising, where he said that he doesn't go into a book with a blueprint at all. So many writers know where the book's going to end up when they start, or at least have some rough idea. But he not only has no idea what the ending is when he starts a book, he doesn't know what the second chapter is going to be, what it's going to hold, what it's going to contain, what it's going to look like. I got the sense from him that he, in writing, that he is discovering as much as he's creating. And that was, that wasn't terribly surprising, actually. When you read Ondaatje's fiction, you get that sense that there's something kind of roving about his intellect and about his aesthetic that you either latch onto or you can't stand. I myself am a huge fan of it, but that was one of the most noteworthy things that I was left with at the end of that conversation. And from there, I went out to the Ishiguro signing, and which had a queue that I just couldn't believe. I've been told that book signings in big cities often have queues like that, but I've never seen one. So apparently when you win the Nobel Prize for Literature, you are a rock star all of a sudden. While in London, Ben and I broke bread with the writers Anne Morgan and Sarah Waters. So I've known Anne Morgan for about 7 years now. I had left a comment on a blog that she was writing at the time, and it was an auspicious exchange, an auspicious connection. If you're curious to learn more about what happened there and what it led to, I will leave a link in the description box below to the blog post that Anne has written here in the last week about our meeting last weekend. It was the first time we'd ever met in person. So I also had a Scotch egg at that meal. It was my first ever Scotch egg. It was made with haddock, and the yolk was glorious. Ben and Anne told me that I was starting my life as an eater of Scotch eggs with the Rolls Royce of Scotch eggs. And then on Sunday evening, when Ben and I spent a couple hours hanging out with Sarah Waters, yeah, it was just wonderful. I mean, we just talked books, and we talked about how our attitudes to owning books change as we get older. We talked about how the environment, the physical environment, right, a neighborhood or the countryside or the city in which a writer works can actually shape somehow that writer's way of approaching their fiction. And it was just a glorious evening. It was a wonderful way to cap off the weekend. And last but not least, Ben, not many people have a friend who would travel to another country to spend 3 days, keeping their friend company and making sure he doesn't get lost in a big giant city. It was wonderful spending all that time with you. Jasmine, Mark, and Neil, in many ways, the hours that Ben and I spent in conversation and in company with each of you last weekend was the highlights of the weekend for me. There was something more wonderful about that than hearing any of those big famous Booker Prize writers talk. So there's something really marvelous and strange about being a friend of someone and being a fan of them at the same time. I haven't quite come to terms with what that means, but I feel really blessed to have all three of you in my life. So thank you. And that was it. That was the Booker weekend, the Golden Booker Adventure, everybody. I'll be back soon with a new video from right here in Wyoming, feet on the ground.